Okay, so you want to buy an airport, find a piece of land, build a runway, let the planes land, collect the fees. It sounds like the closest thing the modern world has to a toll booth. One road in, one road out, and everyone who uses it pays you. No competition. Nobody builds a second airport next to yours. You are by definition the only option. So you sit back, watch the planes arrive, and let the money come in. That is the dream, and it is not entirely wrong. The problem is what happens between the dream and the reality, what it actually costs to get in, what it costs just to keep the lights on, what happens when the world stops flying, and why the smartest infrastructure investors on the planet, people with hundreds of billions of dollars to deploy, still manage to lose spectacular amounts of money on airports that, by every reasonable measure, should have worked. Let's start with the first question: who actually sells airports? For most of history, governments built airports and owned them, public infrastructure paid for by taxpayers. But starting in the 1980s, something changed. Governments realized they were sitting on enormously valuable assets, and private investors realized that a monopoly with guaranteed traffic was exactly the kind of thing you want to own for the next 50 years. The result was a wave of privatization across more than 90 countries. Today, more than 850 airports worldwide have some form of private investment. In Europe, 76% of all passenger traffic moves through privately owned airports. In Latin America, 78%. The United States is almost entirely the opposite. American airports are still owned by city and state governments. The only major commercial airport fully privatized under the federal program is Luis Muñoz Marin International in San Juan, Puerto Rico. JFK, LAX, O'Hare, Atlanta, all publicly owned. American airports are funded through tax-exempt bonds that private buyers cannot access, making privatization economics unusually difficult there. Governments sell airports in one of three ways: an outright sale, a long-term concession where the buyer takes control for 40 to 99 years and then hands it back, or a public stock offering. The concession model has become the most popular because it lets governments raise money without fully surrendering the asset. In 2002, the Australian government leased Sydney Airport for 99 years. 20 years later, a consortium of Australian superannuation funds acquired full control for approximately 32 billion Australian dollars, the largest infrastructure takeover in Australian history, 32 billion Australian dollars for a single airport. And the buyers considered it a reasonable price. Here is why. When investors value an airport, they compare the purchase price against EBITDA, the money the business earns before paying interest, taxes, and accounting adjustments. A healthy airport sells for between 15 and 23 times its annual EBITDA. The Sydney deal was struck during a pandemic when travel had collapsed. The buyers were not paying for what the airport earned in 2022. They were paying for what they expected it to earn over the next several decades. That is the core logic. You are not buying today's earnings. You are buying a monopoly position in a city permanently for as long as air travel exists. What if you can't buy an existing airport? What if you want to build one? The first thing you need is land. A modern international airport requires between 50 and 140 square kilometers of flat, legally cleared territory. Denver International Airport covers 137 square kilometers, an area larger than the entire city of San Francisco. Acquiring that land, clearing title, compensating everyone displaced, and ensuring it avoids protected zones costs hundreds of millions before a single foundation is poured. Then come the runways. A runway is not a road. It is a multi-layered engineered structure, designed to withstand the full weight of a 400-ton aircraft landing at high speed, repeated tens of thousands of times per year for over a century. Building a single major runway costs over $1 billion in most developed countries. When Heathrow proposed adding a third runway, the estimated cost was between $13 and $18 billion for one runway at a site where infrastructure already exists. When Gatwick Airport was sold in 2009, the entire purchase price was £1.5 billion. A decade later, Gatwick's proposed new runway alone was estimated at £10 to £13 billion, roughly 8 times what the whole airport sold for. Then there are the terminals, not buildings, small cities. Baggage systems moving thousands of bags through underground conveyor networks. Air conditioning processing millions of cubic meters per hour. Security lanes meeting government explosive detection standards. Jet bridges calibrated to dozens of different aircraft door heights. Backup power for every critical system. All of it running simultaneously, continuously, 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Beijing Daxing International Airport opened in 2019, cost approximately $17 billion. Istanbul's new airport cost around $12 billion for the first phase alone. Even then, you are not done. Environmental clears throat. Assessments, community consultations, regulatory sign-offs, and years of legal challenges routinely add 3 to 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars before a single plane lands. Here is the trap that destroys airport projects more reliably than almost anything else. When you borrow money to build an airport, and you always borrow money, You start paying interest the day the loan arrives, not the day the airport opens, not the day the first plane lands, the day the money arrives. Every month of construction delay is a month paying interest on billions of dollars while generating zero revenue. The Berlin-Brandenburg Airport was originally scheduled to open in October 2011. It finally opened in October 2020, 9 years late. The original budget was approximately €2 billion. The final cost was approximately €7 billion, more than 3 times the estimate. The airport opened during a global pandemic when air travel had collapsed. The chief expert who had advised on the project since the 1990s said publicly that it was not foreseeable the airport would ever come out of the red, and that it would likely become a permanent machine requiring government subsidies indefinitely. What caused 9 years of delay? Not construction materials, not labor strikes, not bad weather. The fire safety system did not work. The automated system designed to extract smoke from the terminal had been integrated too late in the project. When engineers tested it, it failed. Every time regulators found a flaw, construction stopped and was redesigned. Then the fire safety code changed, requiring another redesign. Cables had been laid without proper documentation, making inspections impossible without tearing out completed work. Escalators were incorrectly dimensioned, automatic doors malfunctioned, roof structures leaked. None of these were individually catastrophic. Together they cost €4 billion in 9 years. Denver International Airport suffered a similar problem in the 1990s. It opened 16 months late almost entirely because of a $200 million automated baggage handling system that destroyed luggage during testing. The airport cost $4.8 billion total. During those 16 months of closure, the cost to Denver in interest and operating expenses was estimated at approximately $1.1 million per day. Every day the airport sat empty, it cost Denver $1.1 million. When the airport finally opens, money comes in from 2 completely different categories. The first is aeronautical revenue, fees charged to airlines for using the basic infrastructure, landing fees based on aircraft weight. A charge per departing passenger, fees for parking aircraft on the apron. At Heathrow, airlines pay roughly $9,000 every time a widebody aircraft lands. Every departing passenger generates a fee of approximately $55. Sound like good money? It is, but here is the problem. Governments in almost every country impose strict limits on how much airports can charge airlines. The logic is straightforward. The airports are monopolies. If you want to fly to London, there is Heathrow. Without regulation, Heathrow could charge whatever it liked. To prevent this, regulators set caps. In the United Kingdom, the Civil Aviation Authority runs a detailed review every 5 years and sets a maximum charge per passenger. During the review period covering 2022 to 2026, the regulator reduced Heathrow's allowed charge to £21.03 per passenger, nearly 20% below the prior period. Heathrow disputed this immediately, arguing the cap was too low to finance the infrastructure investment required. The regulator said the airport was profitable enough. The legal dispute dragged on for months. This is the structural reality of aeronautical revenue. The government tells you how much you can charge, and the answer is always less than you want. Because aeronautical revenue is tightly regulated, every major privatized airport has built a second business inside the first one, a business that regulators cannot cap, that grows faster than passenger numbers, and that generates margins airlines can only dream about. That business is everything that is not the runway. Globally, non-aeronautical revenue accounts for approximately 37% of total airport income. In Europe and Asia, sometimes over 40%, and it is growing faster than aeronautical revenue in almost every market. The single biggest source of this money, at least in the United States, is parking at American airports. Parking and ground transportation account for 46% of all commercial revenue. In the 2024 fiscal year, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport generated $251 million from parking alone. Los Angeles International generated approximately $181 million. That is just one line item on a revenue statement that also includes retail concessions, food and beverage, car rental fees, hotel revenues, and real estate leasing. Why is parking so valuable? Because airports have a complete monopoly on the land surrounding themselves. Premium covered parking at major U.S. hubs routinely cost $100 per day, and unlike runway fees, no regulator is watching. The retail model works through a system called the minimum annual guarantee. When an airport allows a brand or restaurant into the terminal, that tenant signs a contract committing to pay either a fixed percentage of their gross sales, typically between 16% and 20%, or a predetermined minimum annual payment, whichever is higher. The airport's commercial income is protected on the downside. A bad year for the perfume shop still generates the minimum guarantee. A great year for the duty-free store means the airport takes its percentage of every single sale. Terminal architecture is designed specifically to maximize time passengers spend in front of these shops. After the security checkpoint, the most stressful moment of the airport experience, designers introduce a recomposure zone. Lower ceilings, softer lighting, wider corridors. The goal is to signal that the stressful part is over and it is now safe to relax. Relax in this context means spend money. Many major duty-free zones have no direct path from security to the departure gates. Passengers must walk through the retail area. Studies show this forced walk-through layout increases sales by up to 60% compared to airports where shops are positioned off to the side. One more detail. Because most people are right-handed and pull their luggage with their right hand, they naturally drift and look right. Airport walkways in many major terminals are designed to curve to the left, so passengers are continuously looking toward high-margin merchandise on the right. All of this revenue looks good on paper. The reason airport investing is not a guaranteed fortune is what you have to spend to generate it. Start with security. Every passenger and bag must be screened using three-dimensional X-ray machines, explosive trace detection equipment, and body scanners that must meet government standards. When those standards upgrade, you upgrade the equipment. No negotiation. Approximately 41% of airports worldwide report significant financial pressure solely from mandated security technology upgrades. The baggage handling system runs entirely underground. Kilometers of conveyor belts and sorting machines continuously drawing enormous electrical power, requiring constant maintenance and specialized engineers. When it fails, the airport stops operating. Utilities at scale are staggering. A large terminal has more floor space than several city blocks of office buildings, running around the clock year-round. Emergency generators must power every critical system during outages. Aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicles must be staffed at all times, even at 3:00 in the morning for a single delayed cargo flight. And then there is snow. At any northern latitude airport, keeping runways clear requires a fleet of specialized plows, sweepers and dacers costing millions each on standby at a moment's notice. A runway closed for 2 hours costs both revenue and reputation. None of this changes based on how busy you are. It does not matter whether 20 million passengers come through or 10 million. The lights stay on, security stays open, the runway gets plowed. The only thing that changes with volume is your revenue. In early 2020, the worst thing that can happen to a business with enormous fixed costs and variable revenue happened to every airport in the world simultaneously. By April of that year, 66% of the world's commercial aircraft were grounded. According to IATA, total industry passenger revenues fell by $418 billion in 2020, a decline of 69% compared to the year before. For airports, this was catastrophic in a very specific way. The runway did not close. The baggage system did not stop. Bond payments still came due every month. Insurance premiums remained. Utilities remained. Airports went from generating hundreds of millions to generating almost nothing while costs stayed largely intact. The retail concessionaires who had signed minimum annual guarantee contracts could not pay. Zero passengers meant zero sales. Forcing tenants to honor the minimum would have bankrupted them. And bankrupt tenants leave empty storefronts that damage the commercial model for years after reopening. The smarter airports suspended the guarantees, shifting tenants to pure percentage of sales arrangements. This destroyed commercial income short-term, but preserved the retail ecosystem for when passengers returned. The airports that survived best did something almost nobody predicted. They converted terminals into cargo hubs. With passenger flights grounded, the cargo that normally travels in aircraft holds, smartphones, pharmaceuticals, fresh food, had nowhere to go. So airports opened gates to freight operations, used empty aprons for staging, and in some cases loaded cargo directly into the empty cabins of grounded passenger aircraft. It was not elegant. It kept the revenue alive. Not all airports face this problem, because not all airports have large passenger volumes to lose. An airport handling fewer than 1 million passengers per year almost always loses money. Not enough passengers to generate the retail spending, parking fees, and aeronautical revenues needed to cover the cost of a building that must stay open 24 hours a day regardless of traffic. These airports survived because governments fund the losses for political reasons, rural connectivity, regional economic development. The more interesting problem is what happens when a small airport tries to attract passengers without government support. The answer is almost always the same: dependence on a single budget airline. Carriers like Ryanair in Europe have built a business model around exploiting this dependency. When a regional airport needs passengers, Ryanair arrives with a proposal. But the price for that traffic is severe. Landing fees cut by 50%, marketing payments, technically described as tourism promotion contributions, but functioning as direct subsidies, worth millions of euros per year. The airport has no choice. Without Ryanair, it has empty gates. With Ryanair, it has some revenue, even if most flows back to the airline as a subsidy. If the airport ever refuses to meet demands for lower fees and higher payments, the airline threatens to relocate. Overnight, the terminal goes from busy to empty. There is a category of airport mistake that is more expensive, more final, and more embarrassing than almost any other kind. The ghost airports that were built, opened, and simply did not fill with passengers, because the passengers were never there to begin with. The demand projections were wrong, not slightly, catastrophically. The clearest example is Ciudad Real's Central Airport in Spain. Built during the mid-2000s construction boom, Ciudad Real was designed as an alternative hub to Madrid Barajas. One of the longest runways in Europe at 4.1 km, a terminal capable of handling 10 million passengers per year, plans for a high-speed rail connection. Investors believed Madrid was running out of capacity and that a well-connected alternative 200 km to the south would capture the overflow. The airport opened in 2008. In 2 years, the operating company was bankrupt. By 2012, it had closed. Airlines did not want to fly to a city of 75,000 people 200 km from the market they needed to serve, a billion-euro structure with no purpose. When it went to bankruptcy auction, a Chinese investment firm submitted a bid of 10,000 euros. The court rejected it. After years of failed sales, the airport acquired in 2018 for 56 million euros, roughly 5% of what it cost to build. Today, it is a storage and dismantling facility for retired aircraft. Sri Lanka's Matala Rajapaksa International Airport is an even starker version of the same story. Built for $209 million in a remote low-population area, funded through loans from China's Export-Import Bank, designed to handle 1 million passengers annually. Today, it handles roughly a dozen passengers per day. The government owes approximately $23.6 million per year in debt service on the loan used to build it. Parts of the facility have been rented out to store rice. In both cases, the fundamental error was identical, built on political ambition rather than route planning data. Nobody asked the airlines first, and airlines are very good at identifying where passengers actually want to go. If they will not fly to your airport, the passengers cannot come. And without passengers, there is no business. Now, let's look at what happens when an airport does everything right. Spain's Aena Group manages 46 airports in Spain, plus international assets in Brazil and the United Kingdom. In 2024, it reported total consolidated revenue of 5.8 billion euros. Its operating profit, EBITDA, was 3.5 billion euros with a margin of 60%. In most industries, a 10% operating margin is considered healthy. An airport at 60% is extracting extraordinary value from every person who walks through the door. Commercial revenue at Aena grew by 14.7% in 2024, outpacing the growth in passenger numbers. The company handled 369.5 million passengers across its network, roughly 1 million per day. At that scale, a €1 increase in average commercial spending per passenger across the Spanish network alone is worth over €300 million annually. Frankfurt Airport's operator, the Fraport Group, tells a similar story. Frankfurt is one of the busiest cargo airports in Europe and one of the most important connecting hubs on the continent. Airlines cannot easily bypass it. Not because there is no alternative, but because enough of their connecting passengers expect Frankfurt as a transfer point that removing it would cost them passengers across entire networks. That is the competitive position that makes a large airport different from a small one. The small airport needs airlines. The large airport is a destination airlines cannot afford to ignore. The airport of the coming decades will not look like the airport of today. The most significant structural change is the shift toward what urban planners call the aerotropolis model. Instead of building an airport and connecting it to a city, the city is built around the airport. Commercial zones, logistics parks, hotel districts, research facilities, and industrial areas grow concentrically around the terminal, each chosen because it benefits from proximity to fast international air connections. The economic logic is direct. Every minute a pharmaceutical shipment or electronics order spends in transit loses value. Companies that move time-sensitive goods locate next to airports. Airports that understand this sell or lease surrounding land at premium prices and generate stable long-term income that has nothing to do with how many passengers boarded that morning. Inside the terminal, the future is about eliminating friction. The most expensive part of the airport experience, in terms of lost commercial revenue, is the security queue. Every minute a passenger spends in line is a minute they are not spending money. Airports are investing in biometric systems where face recognition matches your passport and boarding pass simultaneously as you walk through a gate. No queue, no stopping. The goal is to make security as invisible as swiping into a subway station. More time on the retail floor, more money per passenger. That is the entire strategy. Here is the honest answer. It depends entirely on scale. A small regional airport handling fewer than 1 million passengers per year almost certainly loses money. Fixed costs cannot be spread across enough passengers to reach profitability. It exists because a government subsidizes it, because a single airline needs it, or because someone is waiting for passenger numbers to grow. The average net margin for this category is negative. A mid-sized hub between 15 and 25 million passengers annually is where the economics become genuinely attractive. Non-aeronautical revenue grows faster than costs. Minimum annual guarantee contracts with retailers become valuable. Parking demand is stable enough that the lots essentially run themselves. These airports represent the sweet spot of the business. A mega hub above 40 million passengers per year is a different category entirely. As INA demonstrated in 2024 with a 60% EBITDA margin, the most successful large airports are among the most profitable infrastructure assets in the world. They face the heaviest regulatory scrutiny and the largest capital obligations. They spend billions rebuilding terminals and fighting fee reviews. But at their volumes, even with those burdens, they generate more cash than almost any comparable asset. Across the global industry, the average net profit margin for airports is approximately 16%. That sounds modest until you remember the scale of the revenues involved. The difference between a good year and a bad year can be hundreds of millions of dollars. Not because passenger numbers change dramatically, but because per passenger commercial spending fluctuates, interest rates shift the cost of debt, and any disruption falls entirely on the revenue side while the cost side barely moves. The fixed costs are what keep airport investors awake at night. Not competition, not regulation, not even the airlines. The fixed costs are there on the day the first plane lands and on the day no planes land at all. And the gap between those 2 days is where fortunes are made and lost. So if you do decide to buy an airport, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying a business. You are buying a piece of infrastructure that forces every airline in your city to pay you, forces every traveler to walk through your shops, and forces every person who drives there to park in your lots. In the right city, at the right scale, with the right management, that is one of the most durable positions in global business. The question is whether you can survive long enough to reach it.